They dragged her to the platform in broad daylight, hooded like an animal, and the crowd laughed. They called her the beast in the sack, a girl so cursed, so hideous, her own family wanted her sold like damaged goods. But when a giant cowboy rode into Dry Creek that morning, he saw something no one else did. He saw a human being, and what happened next would shatter everything this cruel town believed about monsters, beauty, and what it means to be worth saving. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Mira's journey travels across this world. The sun hammered down on Dry Creek's market square like God himself had forgotten mercy existed. Dust devils spun between the wooden stalls where farmers hawked bruised apples and wilted greens, where the butcher's block ran red with flies, where everything and everyone had a price if you knew how to bargain. It was the kind of town where desperation wore a smile and cruelty dressed up as entertainment, where decent folk learned to look away because looking away was easier than caring. But today, the crowd wasn't looking away. Today, they'd gathered thick as locusts around the auction platform at the square's east end, jostling for position, pointing and laughing like they'd stumbled onto the finest show this side of the Mississippi. On that platform, shackled at the wrists and ankles, stood a figure wrapped head to toe in stained burlap. The sack hung loose around a small frame, cinched at the neck with coarse rope that had rubbed the material raw. Through two crude eye holes cut into the fabric, nothing showed but shadow. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there beneath the merciless sun while the crowd worked itself into a frenzy. "Step right up," bellowed Marcus Thorne, a weasel of a man with slicked back hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. He wore a threadbare suit that might have been fine 20 years ago, and he wielded a walking cane like a showman's prop, rapping it against the platform boards for emphasis. "Come see the marvel, the mystery, the monster we've kept hidden all these years." A woman in a faded calico dress clutched her husband's arm, giggling nervously. "Is it real? Is there really something under there?" "Oh, it's real, ma'am." Marcus swept his cane toward the hooded figure. "Real as the devil's own handiwork, my own flesh and blood, though it shames me to say it. But a man's got limits, don't he? A man can only bear so much ugliness under his own roof before it starts to poison everything decent." The crowd murmured its agreement. Behind Marcus stood his wife, Margaret Thorne, a hard-faced woman with lips pressed so thin they'd nearly disappeared. She held a handkerchief to her nose as though the hooded figure emitted some foul stench, though anyone with eyes could see the only thing rotting in Dry Creek that day was human decency. "We've fed it, clothed it, kept it out of Christian sight for 16 long years," Margaret added, her voice sharp as a whip crack. "Locked it away where it couldn't frighten the God-fearing. But charity has its limits. Every family's got a burden, but ours has been a curse since the day she caught herself. It crawled out of the flames." "Flames?" someone called out. "What happened?" Marcus leaned on his cane, warming to his tale. "House fire, back when the creature was 5 years old. Started in the kitchen where it was playing with matches. Foolish child. Killed its grandmother, scarred itself beyond recognition. We pulled it from the burning boards, saved its miserable life, and this," he gestured with disgust, "is what survived. A face that'd make a grown man weep. Features that ain't quite human anymore." The hooded figure's shoulders drew inward, shrinking against the words like blows. "So we done what any decent family would do," Marcus continued. "We kept it hidden, kept it fed. But 16 years of that charity has bled us dry, and we got other children to think about. Normal children who deserve a future not shadowed by this beast," Margaret finished coldly. "That's what the hands call it. The beast in the sack." The crowd pressed closer, morbid fascination glittering in their eyes. A boy no older than 12 picked up a clod of dirt and hurled it at the platform. It struck the hooded figure's shoulder, and the crowd erupted in laughter. Now," Marcus chided with mock severity, though his eyes gleamed with approval. "Let's keep this civilized. We're here to find this creature a new home, a fresh start. Surely there's someone charitable enough to take it off our hands, someone with a strong stomach and a stronger fence?" "How much you askin'?" called a rancher in a dust-covered hat. "We ain't greedy," Marcus replied. $20, and it's yours. Take it home, put it to work. It can cook, clean, mend, does all right with its hands. Just keep it covered. Keep it out of sight of decent folk. and you'll have yourself a tireless servant." "I wouldn't pay 20 cents, someone shouted. "Not for something you gotta keep bagged like spoiled meat." The laughter that followed was ugly, sharp-edged. The hooded figure's breathing came faster now, visible in the rapid rise and fall of the burlap sack. Thin fingers, visible beneath the wrist shackles, trembled. An older woman with a kind face started to step forward, her hand reaching for her husband's sleeve. "Samuel, maybe we could—" "Don't," he cut her off, firm but not unkind. "Don't get involved in thorn business. Nothing good comes of it." She hesitated, then retreated into the crowd, and the hooded figure seemed to shrink even smaller. $10, Marcus called out, desperation creeping into his voice now. "Surely someone's got $10 for a working servant?" "5, came a gravelly voice from the back. "And only 'cause I need help with the hogs. Figure something that ugly won't spook 'em none." The crowd roared with laughter. Marcus was about to respond when the atmosphere shifted. A change as sudden as a summer storm rolling over the plains. The laughter died mid-breath. Heads turned. The crowd parted like the Red Sea before Moses, though nobody seemed quite sure why they were moving, only that something in their bones told them to make way. Through the gap rode a man on a horse so black it seemed to swallow sunlight. But it wasn't the horse that made the crowd step back. It was the rider. Colt Maddox stood 6 feet 6 inches in his boots, built like a mountain had decided to walk upright and wear a duster coat. His shoulders were broad enough to carry timber, his hands large enough to palm a man's skull like a melon. Beneath a wide-brimmed hat, his face was all hard angles and weathered planes, sun-carved features that spoke of long years under open sky, of dust storms weathered and harsh truths learned. But his eyes were what stopped people mid-breath. Gray as a winter dawn, they held a stillness that predators recognized in each other. Not cruel, not mean, just absolutely certain of what they were capable of and completely unimpressed by lesser men's noise. He dismounted in one fluid motion despite his size, boots hitting the packed earth with the finality of a judge's gavel. He didn't hurry, didn't speak, just walked toward the platform with the inevitability of sunrise, the crowd scrambling out of his path. Marcus Thorne's grin faltered. "Well now, Mr. Maddox, didn't know you were in town. You interested in—" "How much?" Colt's voice was deep as a well, quiet as distant thunder. What?" "The girl. How much?" Marcus licked his lips, suddenly uncertain. Everyone in 3 counties knew Colt Maddox. Knew he ran a ranch north of town with his 3 children after his wife passed. Knew he kept to himself, paid his bills, and didn't tolerate fools. Also knew that the last man who'd tried to cheat him in a cattle deal had ended up with his arm in a sling and his pride in splinters. $20, Marcus said, trying to sound confident. "Like I said, she's a hard worker, just needs a firm—" "She!" Colt's gaze fixed on Marcus like a rifle sight. "Thought you called it a beast." Margaret stepped forward, her handkerchief clutched tight. "Now see here, Mr. Maddox, this don't concern—" Colt's eyes shifted to her, and whatever she saw there made her step back so fast she nearly tripped on her skirts. 20, Marcus repeated, recovering his bluster. "And the chains come with her, seeing as she's prone to wandering if you don't—" Colt reached into his coat and produced a small leather pouch. He counted out bills, not 20, but 25, and set them on the platform edge with the care of a man handling dynamite. "Open the lock," he said. "Now hold on," Marcus began. "There's paperwork to—" Colt reached out, almost casually, and wrapped one massive hand around Marcus's walking cane. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then he twisted, just once, and the cane snapped like kindling. The crack echoed across the suddenly silent square. "Open." "The lock." Marcus scrambled for the key with shaking hands, nearly dropping it twice before he managed to fit it into the shackles. The chains fell away with a clatter that sounded too loud in the stillness. The hooded figure swayed, free limbs uncertain, then started to crumple. Colt caught her before she hit the boards. One arm swept beneath her knees, the other behind her shoulders, and he lifted her as easily as a man might lift a child. She weighed almost nothing, all bones and fear and starvation beneath that burlap shroud. "Now wait just a minute," Margaret shrilled. "You can't just— She's ours until—" "She's no one's," Colt said, and there was something in his voice that made it fact rather than opinion. "You sold her. Transaction's complete." He turned, The girl cradled against his chest and began walking back toward his horse. The crowd remained frozen, unsure whether to be terrified or enthralled. Behind him, Marcus found his voice. "You'll regret it," he called out, trying to save face. "You'll see what we had to live with. That face will haunt your nightmares. Your children will have terrors. You'll be begging us to take it back within a week." Colt didn't turn around, didn't pause, but his voice carried clear across the square. "I've seen nightmares. They don't usually come chained on auction blocks." He reached his horse, adjusted his grip on the girl, and somehow mounted with her still in his arms, a feat of horsemanship and strength that left the crowd murmuring. Once settled in the saddle, he positioned her carefully in front of him, one arm locked secure around her waist. "Easy now," he murmured, though whether to the girl or the horse wasn't clear. "We're going home." The black horse wheeled and started forward at a steady walk. As they passed through the crowd, a few people stepped forward as if to speak, questions forming on their lips, protests or warnings or simple curiosity. But something in Colt's bearing made the words die unspoken. The hooded girl remained utterly still in his arms, her covered head bowed, her whole body rigid as stone. But as they cleared the edge of the market square and turned onto the north road, something changed. A small sound emerged from beneath the burlap. Not quite a sob, not quite a breath. Just a tiny exhalation that might have been the first easy breath she'd taken in years. Colt's arm tightened slightly around her waist. Not constraining, anchoring. "You're safe," he said, so quiet only she could hear. "I promise you that." The girl didn't respond. Couldn't respond, maybe. But her rigid posture eased by the smallest degree, her weight settling back against his chest as the town of Dry Creek disappeared behind them in a cloud of dust and broken expectations. The ride north took the better part of 2 hours. Colt kept the horse to a steady pace, fast enough to put distance between them and town, slow enough that the girl wouldn't be jostled. She remained silent the entire journey, occasionally shaking with what might have been sobs or shock, her fingers clutching the burlap around her throat like it was armor rather than prison. Colt didn't push, didn't speak beyond low murmurs to his horse. He'd learned long ago that some silences were sacred, that sometimes the kindest thing you could do was simply be present without demanding anything in return. The land changed as they traveled. The scrubby plains around Dry Creek gave way to rolling hills studded with cottonwoods, then to grassland dotted with cattle. In the distance, the Bitterroot Mountains rose like sleeping giants, their peaks still crowned with last winter's snow despite the summer heat. Finally, they crested a hill and Colt's ranch spread out below, a sturdy 2-story house built from dark timber, a barn that could shelter 50 head, corrals, and outbuildings arranged with the precision of a man who valued order. Smoke curled from the chimney, and 3 small figures burst from the front door at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. "Pa!" The oldest, a girl of 12 with her father's gray eyes and her late mother's dark hair in braids, stopped short at the sight of the hooded figure. Behind her, twin boys of 9 skidded to a halt, nearly colliding with their sister. "Emma," Colt said as he dismounted, carefully keeping the girl steady. "Sam, Ben, I need you to go inside and set an extra place at the table." Emma's eyes widened. "Pa, Do what I ask, sweetheart. We'll talk inside." The children hesitated only a moment before obeying, their curious glances backward as they hurried toward the house. Colt turned his attention to the girl in his arms, who had gone rigid again at the sight of the children. "I'm going to set you down now," he said gently, "but I won't let you fall, all right?" No response. But when he slowly lowered her feet to the ground, she managed to stand, though her legs trembled like a newborn colt's. "Can you walk?" he asked. A tiny nod, barely visible. "Then come on, let's get you inside, get you fed and settled." He started toward the house, moving slow enough that she could follow. She did, shuffle-stepping like the chains were still on her ankles, her covered head swiveling between the house and the barn and the wide-open spaces around them. Looking for the cage, probably. Looking for the locked room she'd been promised. The front door stood open. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and fresh bread and something savory bubbling on the stove. It was a working home, lived in but clean, boots lined up by the door, coats on hooks, a rag rug worn soft in front of the fireplace. Emma stood by the kitchen table, which she'd hastily set with a 4th plate. while the twins hovered near the stairs, eyes huge with curiosity. Colt removed his hat and hung it by the door. The girl remained frozen just inside the threshold, as if crossing further into the house required permission she was certain would be denied. "Emma," Colt said, "this is our guest. She'll be staying with us." "What's her name?" Emma asked, trying to peer under the hood. "I don't know yet," Colt admitted. He crouched down slightly, bringing himself closer to the hooded girl's level. "Would you like to tell us your name?" Silence. Then, so faint it was barely audible, a whisper emerged from beneath the burlap. "Mira." "Mira," Colt repeated, as if the name were something precious to be handled carefully. "That's a good name. I'm Colt. This is Emma, and the two troublemakers by the stairs are Sam and Ben." "I ain't a troublemaker," Ben protested. "Sam's the troublemaker." "Am not." "Both of you hush," Emma said with the authority of an eldest sibling. She stepped closer to Mira, her expression softening. "Are you hungry? Pa made stew this morning, and I baked bread yesterday. It's only a little burned on the bottom." Mira's head moved, not quite a nod, but something like it. "Then sit," Colt said, gesturing to the chair they'd prepared. "Emma, dish up 4 bowls. Boys, wash your hands and come eat." They moved around Mira like she was a wild animal that might bolt, gentle, careful, giving her space. She remained standing until Colt pulled out the chair himself and waited, patient as stone, until she finally shuffled forward and lowered herself onto it. Even sitting, she kept the burlap clutched tight around her throat. Her hands, emerging from the sack's rough sleeves, were thin as bird bones, the nails broken and dirty. When Emma set a bowl of stew in front of her, she stared at it like she didn't understand what it was for. "Go on," Colt encouraged, taking his own seat. "Eat." Slowly, so slowly, one hand crept toward the spoon. She lifted it with the trembling care of someone defusing a bomb, brought it to the edge of the burlap where her mouth must be, and somehow maneuvered a bite beneath the hood. The family ate in near silence. The only sounds the clink of spoons on tin bowls and the crackle of the fire. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. The children had been raised better than to stare, though their curiosity was palpable. Colt kept his attention on his own meal, but his awareness never left Mira, noting how she flinched at sudden movements, how her breathing hitched when Sam dropped his spoon, how she ate like someone who expected the food to be snatched away any moment. When the bowls were empty, Emma cleared the table without being asked. The twins fidgeted in their chairs, clearly bursting with questions they'd been taught were impolite to ask. "Boys," Colt said, "go do your evening chores. Emma, help them with the chickens, please." "But Pa," Sam began. "Now, please." They went, reluctance in every step, and suddenly the kitchen was quiet again. Just Colt and Mira, the firelight casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. Colt pulled his chair around the table corner, closer to Mira, but still not crowding. When he spoke, his voice was gentle as a man trying not to spook a wounded creature. "Mira, I'm going to be straight with you. You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you, lock you away, or sell you again. But I need to know. Are you injured? Are you sick? Do you need a doctor?" The hooded head shook violently. "No doctor, please." "All right. No doctor if you don't want one." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Are you going to keep that sack on?" Her hands clutched tighter at the fabric. "Yes." "Even to sleep? Even when you wash?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "That's your choice. I won't force you to do anything you're not ready for. But I will say this. There's nobody here who's going to judge you, whatever's under that hood. Nobody here cares what you look like. We care that you're fed, safe, and treated decent. Understand?" A long pause. Then, barely audible. "Why? Why what? Why did you—" Her voice broke, and she had to start again. "Why did you buy me?" Colt leaned back in his chair, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," he said finally. Fever took her in the space of a week. One day she was laughing at Sam's jokes, the next she was too weak to stand, and then she was gone. He looked toward the fire, his expression distant. "After she passed, I thought I'd lost more than just her. Thought I'd lost the part of me that could see people as people instead of just shapes that took up space. Thought I'd gone cold all the way through. He turned back to Mira. Then today I rode into town and saw you on that platform. Saw how they looked at you, talked about you, like you were less than human. And something in me just broke. Or maybe woke up. I don't know which. He shook his head. But I knew I couldn't ride away. Knew I couldn't leave you there. So I didn't. Mira sat perfectly still, and Colt wondered if she was crying under that hood, if tears were soaking into the burlap where no one could see them. You don't owe me anything for it, he continued. You don't have to work yourself to death or be grateful every minute. You're a guest here, not a servant. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, you can leave. I'll give you money, a horse, whatever you need. But until then, you've got a roof over your head and a place at this table. That's the deal. For a long moment, Mira didn't respond. Then, in a voice so small it was almost lost beneath the crackle of the fire, she whispered, "No one's ever called me a guest before." Then, it's about time someone did. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. Through the window, Colt could see his children finishing their chores, Emma herding the twins toward the barn. Soon they'd come back inside, full of questions he wasn't sure how to answer. But for now, in this moment, there was just a kitchen warmed by firelight, a table that had seen its share of grief and joy, and two people, one giant of a man with a guarded heart, and one terrified girl in a burlap sack, learning what it might mean to trust again. Mira's hands slowly loosened their death grip on the fabric at her throat, not removing it, not yet, but easing, just slightly, the way a person might ease their grip on a weapon when they finally believe the battle is over. "Thank you," she breathed. Colt nodded once, then stood to stoke the fire, giving her privacy for whatever emotions were moving across her hidden face. Outside, the first stars began to emerge, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the coming night. In the morning, there would be questions to answer, routines to establish, a dozen small adjustments to make. But tonight, for the first time in 16 years, Mira Thorne would sleep in a house where she was not a monster, not a curse, not a beast, just a girl named Mira who had finally, impossibly, found something she'd never dared hope for. She'd found a home. The first night passed in restless silence. Colt had given Mira the small room at the end of the upstairs hall, once a sewing room, now hastily converted with a narrow bed, a wash basin, and a window that looked out over the eastern pasture. He'd left the door open a crack, not to watch her, but to let her know she wasn't locked in, that she could leave if she needed to. Around 2 in the morning, he'd woken to the sound of footsteps on the stairs, soft, hesitant, like someone testing whether the floorboards would give them away. He'd found her in the kitchen, still hooded, standing motionless by the back door with her hand on the latch. "You can go if you want," he'd said quietly from the doorway, making sure she knew he wasn't blocking her path. "Door's not locked. Never will be." She'd stood there for what felt like an eternity, her thin shoulders rising and falling with rapid breaths. Then slowly, so slowly, her hand had dropped from the latch. She'd turned and shuffled past him without a word, back up the stairs to her room. In the morning, he'd found her curled in the corner of that room rather than on the bed, the quilt he'd left folded at the foot pulled around her like she was building a nest. She hadn't touched the bed at all. It was Emma who figured it out. "She's not used to soft things," his daughter had whispered over breakfast that second morning, while Mira sat silent at the table, her hooded head bowed over a plate of eggs she was eating one tiny bite at a time. "Probably thinks she doesn't deserve it." Colt had looked at his 12-year-old daughter with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Too young to carry that kind of understanding, but there it was anyway. The days that followed fell into an uneasy rhythm. Mira remained in her hood and sack, never removing them even for a moment. She ate when food was put in front of her, but never asked for anything. She stayed in corners and against walls, always positioning herself where she could see all the exits. At night they'd hear her pacing, soft footfalls overhead like a ghost learning to haunt in reverse. The children, to their credit, adapted with the easy resilience of youth. After the initial shock wore off, they simply accepted that the hooded girl was part of their household now, as natural as the chickens in the yard or the cattle on the hills. It was the twins who started it, though Colt never did figure out which one had the idea first. 5 days after Mira's arrival, Sam approached her as she sat in her usual corner of the living room, watching the family go about their evening. He held out a piece of paper and a stub of charcoal. "Can you draw?" he asked. The hooded head tilted, uncertain. I don't know." "Everyone can draw something," Ben chimed in, appearing at his brother's elbow. "Even if it's just stick people. Look." He grabbed another piece of paper and sketched a crude figure, basically a circle with lines for limbs. "See? That's Pa. He's tall." Despite herself, a sound emerged from under Mira's hood. It might have been a laugh, might have been a sob. Hard to tell. "Here," Sam said, offering the charcoal again. "Draw something on the wall." "Sam," Emma warned from her seat by the fireplace. "Pa said no drawing on the walls." "I said no drawing on the inside walls," Colt corrected from his chair, where he was mending a bridle. "Outside of the house is fair game." The twins exchanged gleeful looks and immediately bolted for the front door. Mira remained frozen for a moment, then slowly rose and followed, drawn by curiosity, or maybe just the novelty of being included in something. Outside, the evening air was cooling, the sun beginning its descent toward the mountains. The boys were already at work on the side of the house, their charcoal stubs scratching against the weathered wood. "Look," Ben said, stepping back to reveal his masterpiece, a lopsided horse that looked more like a dog with a very long neck. "That's Thunder." Thunder being Colt's black stallion, who would probably be offended if he knew. Sam had drawn what appeared to be a chicken, though it could have been a tumbleweed with legs. "And that's General Cluckerson," he announced proudly. Mira stood a few feet away, the charcoal clutched in her thin fingers. She stared at the blank expanse of wood like it was a test she was destined to fail. "You don't have to draw good," Sam said, noticing her hesitation. "Just draw something you like." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Mira's hand moved. The charcoal touched wood, and a line appeared. Then another. Her movements were hesitant at first, then grew more confident as the image took shape. When she stepped back, all three children went quiet. On the wall was a bird in flight. Not perfect by any means, the proportions a bit off, the wings uneven, but there was something about it that caught in the throat. The way the wings were spread wide, the way the head was tilted upward, the way every line seemed to strain toward the sky. It wasn't just a bird, it was the idea of freedom drawn by someone who'd never known it. "That's real pretty," Emma said softly, having wandered out to see what the commotion was about. Mira's hands twisted the charcoal, nearly breaking it. "It's just a bird." "It's a good bird," Ben insisted. "Better than Sam's chicken." "Hey!" Emma picked up another stub of charcoal. Without asking permission, she stepped up to the wall beside Mira's bird and began to draw. Her hand was more practiced. She'd inherited her mother's artistic bent, and soon a flower emerged, petals open to an invisible sun. "There," Emma said, satisfied. "Now your bird has something pretty to fly to." The twins immediately jumped back in, adding their own contributions around the bird and flower. More animals, a crooked sun, what might have been a tree, or possibly a very lumpy cloud. They worked in companionable chaos, occasionally squabbling over space, their laughter ringing out across the yard. Mira stood back and watched, and though her face was hidden, her posture had changed. Her shoulders weren't quite so hunched. Her hands weren't quite so tightly clenched. From the porch, Colt observed it all, something warm unclenching in his chest. He'd wondered how to help this girl, how to reach past the walls she'd built around herself. Leave it to children to find the simplest answer. Just include her. Just make space for her in the ordinary magic of their days. That night at dinner, the conversation flowed easier. The children chattered about their drawings, making plans for what they'd add tomorrow. Mira was quiet, but she was listening, really listening, not just enduring. And once, when Ben told a particularly terrible joke about a horse walking into a barn, a sound emerged from under her hood that was definitely, unmistakably, a laugh. It was small, brief, but it was there. The days began to blur together in the best possible way. Mira still wore her hood and sack, still slept in the corner of her room, still moved through the house like a shadow. But the shadow grew slowly more solid, more present. She began to anticipate mealtimes, coming to the table without being called. She started washing her own dishes, then everyone's, her thin hands efficient in the soapy water. One morning, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Colt came downstairs to find bread rising on the counter. 4 perfect loaves, the dough punched down and shaped with practiced skill. "Did you make these?" he asked Mira, who was huddled in her corner, watching the sunrise through the kitchen window. A nod. "When?" "Before dawn. I couldn't sleep. I hope that's all right. I found the flour and yeast, and I thought maybe I could—" Her voice rose with panic. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have used your—" "Mira." His voice was gentle but firm. "It's fine. Better than fine. This is your home, too. You don't need permission to use the kitchen." She went very still. "Home?" "Yes? But you're just a person who lives here, same as Emma, same as the boys, same as me. That makes this your home." He could hear her breathing quicken beneath the hood, the sound of someone trying not to cry. Before she could retreat further into herself, Emma came bounding down the stairs, still in her nightgown, her dark hair a wild tangle. "Is that bread I smell?" She made a beeline for the counter. "Oh, Mira, it looks perfect. Can you teach me? Mine always comes out flat as a board." Yes, I could teach you." "Really?" Emma's face lit up. "When?" "Whenever you like." And just like that, Mira had a purpose. Something to offer that wasn't born of obligation or fear, but simple sharing of knowledge. Emma pulled up a chair, and soon they were bent over the rising loaves together, Mira's voice soft but steady as she explained the feel of properly kneaded dough, the way yeast needed warmth but not too much heat, the patience required to let things rise in their own time. Colt left them to it and headed out to start the day's work, but the image stayed with him, 2 heads bent together over something ordinary and miraculous, the hooded girl and his daughter building a bridge between them, 1 loaf at a time. The wall drawings multiplied. What started as a small section of doodles soon covered 20 feet of the house's western side. The children drew every evening now, and slowly, tentatively, Mira joined them. Her birds became more confident, joined by flowers, trees, a creek that seemed to flow across the weathered boards. She never drew people, Colt noticed. Only nature, only things that couldn't hurt or judge. One evening, about 3 weeks in, Sam screwed up his courage and asked the question they'd all been wondering. "Mira, why do you wear the sack?" Emma gasped. "Sam, that's rude." "I'm not being mean," Sam protested. "I'm just asking. You're allowed to ask questions." Mira had gone rigid, her charcoal frozen mid-stroke. Colt was about to intervene when she spoke, her voice barely audible. "Because I'm ugly." "Says who?" Ben demanded. "Everyone. My parents, the people in town, everyone who's ever seen me." "Well, we haven't seen you," Sam pointed out with the impeccable logic of a 9-year-old. "So we don't know if you're ugly or not." "I am. Trust me." "Can't trust something I haven't seen with my own eyes," Ben insisted. "Pa says a man, or a kid, should always verify facts before accepting them as truth." Mira made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "You don't want to see—" "Maybe we don't care," Emma said quietly. She set down her charcoal and turned to face Mira directly. "Maybe what you look like doesn't matter to us. Did you think of that? It always matters. It doesn't to us." Mira shook her head, a violent, jerky motion. "You say that now, but if you saw—" Her voice cracked. "You'd look at me different. Everyone does. They see this—" She touched the burlap covering her face. "And they see a monster." Colt stepped forward then, his shadow falling across the drawings on the wall. "Mira, look at me." When the hooded head turned toward him, he continued, "I've seen monsters. Real ones. Men who hurt women and children for sport. Men who'd burn down a ranch over a bad card game. Men who'd sell their own kin for whiskey money." His voice was steady as bedrock. "Whatever's under that hood, it's not a monster. It's just a face. And faces don't make monsters. Choices do." "But I'm hideous," she whispered. "The fire, it took half my face. Melted it, twisted it. It's not human anymore." Then you've got one pretty half and one marked half, Ben said matter-of-factly. So what? Old Buck, the ranch dog before he died? He was missing an ear and had a crooked tail, and we loved him anyway. Ben, Emma hissed. What? I'm just saying, being perfect-looking doesn't make someone good, and being scarred doesn't make someone bad. That's just logic. Mira stood frozen, trembling. Around them, the evening insects began their chorus, and from the barn came the soft nickering of horses settling for the night. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. You don't have to show us, Colt said gently. Not until you're ready. Maybe not ever. But I want you to know. When you do, if you do, nothing's going to change. You'll still be Mira. You'll still be welcome at our table. You'll still have a place here. You can't know that, she breathed. I can, and I do. For a moment he thought she might bolt, might retreat to her corner or her room and disappear into herself again. But instead she sank down right there beside the wall, her back pressed against her drawings, her whole body shaking. Emma sat down beside her without hesitation, not touching, but close enough to be a presence. The twins followed suit, forming a semicircle. And then Colt lowered himself to the ground too, his long legs folding up, and they sat there together as the sun set and the stars emerged one by one. They didn't talk, didn't push, just sat with her while she trembled and breathed and tried to believe that maybe, possibly, she might deserve this impossible kindness. The days continued to unspool like thread from a spool. Mira taught Emma to bake, not just bread but biscuits, pies, even a cake for Ben's birthday that listed slightly to one side but tasted like heaven. She started mending clothes without being asked, her stitches small and precise. She learned where everything was kept, anticipated needs before they were spoken, moved through the house with increasing confidence. But she kept the hood on, always. Until one afternoon when everything changed. It was a Tuesday, unseasonably hot, the kind of day where even the cattle looked for shade and the air shimmered over the grass like water. Colt was out checking fence lines in the north pasture. Emma had taken the twins into town for supplies. The house was empty except for Mira, who had taken advantage of the solitude to do a thorough cleaning. She was upstairs, dusting the hallway, when she heard it, a ripping sound, loud and sudden. She looked down and saw that the burlap sack had caught on a protruding nail near the banister. The fabric was old, weakened by weeks of constant wear, and the nail had torn a long gash from her shoulder nearly to her waist. For a moment she just stood there, staring at the damage. Then panic set in. She clutched at the torn edges, trying to hold the sack together, but it was no use. The fabric was ripping further with every movement, coming apart like her armor was finally giving up. She stumbled to her room, breath coming in gasps, and stared at herself in the small mirror above the wash basin, the first time she'd looked at her reflection in weeks. Half her face stared back, beautiful in its own right. Delicate features, smooth skin, one eye the color of autumn leaves. But the other half, the scar tissue ran from her temple to her jaw, puckered and twisted, pulling at her eye and mouth, turning what might have been symmetry into something haunting and strange. She'd been 5 when it happened. 16 years she'd lived with this face. 16 years of being told it was too horrible to show, too terrible to bear. And now the sack that had hidden it was literally falling apart in her hands. The sound that came out of her was raw and broken. She sank to the floor, the ruined burlap pooling around her, and for the first time since Colt had brought her home, she let herself truly cry. Not the quiet, hidden tears she'd shed beneath the hood, but great racking sobs that shook her whole body. That was how Emma found her an hour later. The girl had forgotten something and returned early, leaving the twins with the shopkeeper's wife. She'd come upstairs to fetch it and heard the crying, soft now, exhausted, but unmistakable. Emma pushed open the door to Mira's room and stopped short. Mira looked up, her face fully visible for the first time, tears streaming down both the smooth side and the scarred side. She grabbed for the torn burlap, trying frantically to cover herself, her voice rising in panic. Don't look, please don't. Mira, Emma's voice was steady. She stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind her. Mira, it's all right. It's not, you can see. You can see what I am. Emma crossed the room and dropped to her knees in front of Mira. She reached out slowly, telegraphing her movement, and gently pulled Mira's hands away from her face. I can see you, Emma said quietly. And you're beautiful. I'm not. I'm hideous. Everyone says everyone's a liar. Emma's voice was fierce now, her gray eyes, her father's eyes, blazing with conviction. You're beautiful, Mira. Different, yes. Marked, yes, but beautiful. And anyone who can't see that is blind and stupid and not worth your tears. Mira stared at her, shock temporarily overriding panic. You mean that? I don't lie. Emma reached up and touched Mira's scarred cheek with infinite gentleness. This doesn't make you a monster. It makes you someone who survived. That's not the same thing at all. The tears came again, but different this time. Softer. The kind that wash clean rather than drown. Emma pulled Mira into a hug, and Mira collapsed into it, her bare face pressed against Emma's shoulder, sobbing out 16 years of shame and fear and loneliness. They stayed like that until the tears ran dry and Mira's breathing evened out. Finally, Emma pulled back and surveyed the ruined burlap. Well, she said practically, we can't put that back together, and it's too hot for another sack anyway. How about we find you a real dress? Mira's hand flew instinctively to her face. But people will see. People here already know you, and they don't care about your face, trust me. Emma stood and offered her hand. Come on, Ma had some dresses I've been saving. One of them should fit you. Slowly, trembling, Mira took her hand and let herself be pulled to her feet. In Emma's room, which had once been her parents' room, Emma pulled out a trunk from under the bed. Inside were dresses carefully folded and preserved, smelling faintly of lavender. She selected one in soft blue cotton, simple but well made, with long sleeves and a high collar. Here, try this. Mira took the dress like it was made of spun glass. I can't. This was your mother's. And she'd want it worn by someone who needs it. She always said clothes were meant for living, not for storing away like museum pieces. Emma smiled. Besides, it'll fit you better than it fits me. Ma was slim like you. I take after Pa, built sturdy. Mira clutched the dress to her chest, overwhelmed. Emma tactfully turned her back, giving her privacy to change. When she turned around again, Mira stood in the blue dress, and Emma's breath caught. Oh, Mira, you look lovely. Mira's hand started to rise to cover her face, then stopped halfway. Even with, especially with. Emma caught her hand and lowered it gently. No more hiding. Promise me? I don't know if I can. Then start with us, just the family. When you're ready for more, we'll be right there with you. Before Mira could respond, they heard voices downstairs, Colt and the twins returning, boots stomping, the familiar chaos of homecoming. Mira's eyes went wide with panic. They're going to see you, Emma corrected firmly. The real you. And they're going to be happy about it. Come on. She took Mira's hand and, before Mira could protest, led her out of the room and to the top of the stairs. Below, Colt was hanging up his hat while the twins argued about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. Then Ben glanced up and stopped mid-sentence. Pa, he said quietly. Pa, look. Colt turned and his gaze traveled up the stairs. Mira stood frozen on the landing, Emma's hand gripping hers tight, her face fully visible in the afternoon light streaming through the window. One side smooth and lovely, the other marked by fire and time and pain, both sides equally hers, both sides exposed for the first time. For one terrible moment, she waited for the screams, the revulsion, the confirmation of everything her parents had taught her to believe about herself. Instead, Colt's face softened. He smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine, and said simply, "Welcome home, Mira." Sam rushed up the stairs without hesitation. You've been hiding such pretty eyes. I mean, both of them. Even the squinty one is nice. Sam, Emma groaned. What? It is. Ben followed his brother. He tilted his head, studying Mira's face with the frank curiosity of childhood. Does it hurt? Not anymore, Mira whispered. Good, because it looks like it used to hurt a lot. He reached out and touched her hand. I'm glad you don't have to wear that scratchy sack anymore. It looked uncomfortable. And just like that, the terror drained out of her. These children, these beautiful, impossible children, were looking at her face and seeing only her. Not a monster, not a curse, just Mira. Colt climbed the stairs slowly, giving her time to bolt if she needed to. When he reached the landing, he met her eyes, both the clear one and the one framed by scarring, and spoke with quiet intensity. I meant what I said before. Nothing's changed. You're still you, still welcome, still home. Mira's throat worked, but no sound came out. Instead, she did something she hadn't done since she was 5 years old. She smiled. It was lopsided, the scarred side of her face not moving quite the same as the smooth side, but it was genuine and bright and achingly hopeful. Emma squeezed her hand. See? I told you. That evening they sat down to dinner as they always did, but everything felt different. Mira sat without her hood, her face bare, her hair, which she'd washed and braided with Emma's help, hanging in a damp rope over one shoulder. She ate without having to maneuver food under burlap. She smiled when Sam told his terrible jokes. She looked people in the eye when they spoke to her. She was, for the first time in 16 years, simply present in her own life. After the meal, as the children cleared dishes, Colt found Mira standing at the kitchen window, staring out at the darkening hills. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "It's a big step, showing your face." "I didn't mean to," she admitted. "The sack tore, and I panicked, and then Emma—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I thought it would be terrible. I thought people would scream or run or look at me with disgust, but they just saw me. Because that's all there is to see. Just you." She turned to face him, and in the lamplight, her mismatched features held a kind of fierce beauty. "Why are you so kind to me? I told you before, no, really, why? You don't know me. You didn't owe me anything. You could have left me on that platform or bought me and put me to work like a servant. But instead you brought me into your home, let your children care about me, treated me like—" She struggled for the word. "Like I matter." Colt was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words with care. "My wife, Sarah, she used to say that kindness isn't something you ration out to people who deserve it. It's something you give because without it, we're all just animals. She said every person you meet is fighting battles you can't see, carrying burdens you'll never understand, and the least we can do is not add to their load." He looked toward the living room where his children were now sprawling near the fireplace, Emma reading aloud while the twins pretended not to be interested but hung on every word. "After she died, I forgot that for a while. Got hard. Cold. Figured if I didn't care about anyone, couldn't hurt when I lost them." He turned back to Mira. "But then I saw you on that platform, and something Sarah used to say came back to me. The opposite of cruelty isn't kindness, it's seeing. And I saw you, Mira. Saw a human being treated worse than livestock. Couldn't unsee it, couldn't walk away from it." Mira's eyes were bright with tears. "I don't know how to... I've never had anyone." "You don't have to say anything. Just be here. Be part of this family. That's enough." From the living room, Sam called out, "Mira, come listen. Emma's reading the good part with the dragon." Mira looked toward the children, then back at Colt. He nodded toward the living room, a smile tugging at his mouth. "Go on. They'll just get louder if you ignore them." She went, and Colt watched as she settled onto the floor near the fireplace, the children unconsciously shifting to include her in their circle. Emma continued reading, her voice rising and falling with the drama of the tale, and Mira listened with her whole body, leaning in, her scarred face open and unguarded in the firelight. Later, after the children had been shooed to bed and the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Colt found the torn burlap sack discarded on the floor of Mira's room. He picked it up, intending to throw it away, but something stopped him. This sack had been her prison and her protection both. She'd hidden behind it and been defined by it, but it had also brought her here, to this house, to this chance at a different life. He carried it downstairs and washed it clean in the kitchen basin, then hung it on the line out back to dry in the night air. Not to make her wear it again, but to honor what she'd survived, to acknowledge the weight she'd carried and finally set down. Above him, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance, indifferent and eternal. But in the house behind him, a light burned in an upstairs window, Mira's window. And when he looked up, he could see her silhouette against the curtain, not huddled in a corner tonight, standing tall, looking out at the world she'd finally, impossibly, been allowed to join. Tomorrow there would be more healing to do, more fears to face, more steps to take toward whatever future she could build from the ashes of her past. But tonight, in this moment, it was enough that she stood in that window with her face bare and her heart slowly, carefully beginning to hope. The beast in the sack was gone. Only Mira remained. The weeks that followed her unveiling passed like a dream Mira kept expecting to wake from. She moved through the house in her borrowed dresses. Emma had given her 3 of her mother's, all altered to fit, with her face bare and her heart cautiously opening. The children had accepted her transformation so completely that within days it felt like she'd always been this way, always been visible, always been part of their daily rhythm. But the world beyond the ranch was a different matter entirely. It was Colt who first suggested she might want to come to town with them for the monthly supply run. They were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, when he'd brought it up in his careful, unhurried way. "We're heading into Dry Creek on Saturday," he'd said, not looking at her directly, giving her space to react. "Could use an extra pair of hands. Emma's list is longer than my arm this month." Mira's fingers had gone still on the shirt she was mending. "Dry Creek." "Yes." Where I was... Where we met," Colt finished gently. "But you're not that girl anymore. You're not chained on a platform. You're a free woman, part of my family, and you've got every right to walk those streets with your head high." "They'll stare." "Probably." "They'll say things." "Likely." She'd set down her mending and wrapped her arms around herself, the old protective gesture returning. "I don't know if I can." "Then don't. No one's forcing you, but I will say this, you can't hide here forever. Eventually you'll need to face the world again, and the longer you wait, the harder it gets." He'd paused, then added, "Besides, Emma wants to show you off. She's been telling Mrs. Chen at the general store all about your baking. Woman's practically demanding to meet you." Mira had tried to smile at that, but fear still coiled tight in her chest. Still, something in her had shifted since shedding the burlap. Something that whispered maybe, possibly, she could be brave enough to try. So on Saturday morning, she'd found herself in the wagon beside Emma, wearing a green calico dress and a bonnet that shaded most of her scarred side, her hands clenched white-knuckled in her lap. Colt drove with the twins bouncing in the back, seemingly oblivious to the tension radiating from Mira in waves. The closer they got to town, the harder her heart hammered. She recognized landmarks, the crooked oak, the creek crossing, the hill that marked the final approach. And then Dry Creek spread before them, its single main street lined with false-fronted buildings, its market square still bustling with Saturday commerce. "You all right?" Emma whispered. Mira shook her head. I can't do this. Please let me wait in the wagon." "Hey," Emma grabbed her hand. "You're not alone. We're all right here. And if anyone says one mean word, Pa will—" "I won't have to do anything," Colt interrupted mildly as he pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store. "Because Mira's going to hold her head up and show this town exactly what a real lady looks like. Isn't that right?" It wasn't really a question. It was a challenge, delivered in that quiet way of his that somehow expected the best from people and usually got it. Mira found herself nodding before she'd consciously decided to, found herself letting Emma help her down from the wagon while her knees threatened to give out. The street was crowded, families doing their shopping, ranchers haggling over equipment, children darting between adults like minnows in a stream. And then someone noticed her. The recognition rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. Conversation stuttered, heads turned. A woman gasped and clutched her husband's arm. Within seconds, it felt like every eye in Dry Creek was fixed on Mira's face. She wanted to run, wanted to disappear, wanted the burlap hood back despite everything, because at least then she'd been invisible, protected by anonymity, even if it was suffocating. But Emma's hand was firm in hers, and Colt's presence at her back was solid as stone, and somehow her feet kept moving toward the general store. "That's her," someone whispered, not quietly enough. "That's the Thorn girl. The beast. Lord have mercy, look at that face. Half pretty, half nightmare. Like something out of a storybook gone wrong." Each word was a needle, sharp and precise. Mira's breath came shallow and quick, her vision narrowing to the door ahead. Just the door. Just get to the door. Then a man stepped into their path. He was middle-aged, thick around the middle, with the red-veined nose of a heavy drinker. Mira recognized him. He'd been at the auction, had laughed the loudest when Marcus called her a beast. "Well, well," he drawled, his eyes traveling over her face with undisguised disgust. "Colt Maddox slumming it with freaks now? Thought you had more sense than to parade something like that around decent folk." Colt's hand landed on Mira's shoulder, steadying. When he spoke, his voice was conversational, almost pleasant. "Frank, I'm going to give you one chance to step aside and apologize to the lady." Frank sneered. "Lady? That thing ain't no lady. It's barely human. Should have left it on the auction block where it belonged. That's your opinion. Now move. Or what? You going to defend your monster's honor?" Frank laughed, looking around for support from the gathering crowd. "Everyone can see what she is. No amount of pretty dresses is going to change the fact that she's—" He didn't get to finish. Colt moved with startling speed for a man his size, his hand shooting out to grip Frank's collar and lift him nearly off his feet. The casual strength in the gesture was terrifying. "Her name," Colt said softly, "is Mira, and she's worth 10 of you on your best day. Now you're going to apologize, or you're going to find out exactly how little patience I have for men who insult women." Frank's face went purple, then pale. Around them the crowd had gone silent, watching with bated breath. Finally, Frank managed to choke out, "I apologize. To her, not to me." Frank's eyes slid to Mira, who stood frozen, trembling. "I apologize," he repeated, the words bitter as bile. Colt released him, and Frank stumbled back, nearly falling. He shot them all a venomous look before disappearing into the crowd, muttering under his breath. The onlookers began to disperse, the show over, but the stares remained. "Come on," Emma said gently, tugging Mira toward the store. Mrs. Chen's waiting. Inside the general store, the atmosphere was different. Mrs. Chen, a tiny woman with silver hair and sharp, kind eyes, came around the counter the moment they entered. "So this is her," she said, looking Mira up and down without flinching. "Emma's told me all about you. Says you make bread that could make angels weep." Mira blinked, thrown by the matter-of-fact greeting. Yes, ma'am. I bake. I don't know about angels." "False modesty's a waste of time, girl. You either can bake or you can't." Mrs. Chen gestured to the shelves. "I've been thinking about adding fresh bread to my stock. Store-bought's fine, but folks around here would pay premium for something homemade. You interested in supplying me?" What?" "Supplying me. Bread, biscuits, pies, maybe. I'll pay fair, 70-30 split. You get the 70. Could be good income for you." Mira stared at her, unable to process what she was hearing. This woman was offering her work, real work, not charity, not pity, but actual business. "I don't have money for supplies," she managed finally. "I'll front the supplies, deduct from your first month's earnings. We'll call it an investment." Mrs. Chen's eyes were shrewd but not unkind. "That face of yours is unusual, I'll grant you, but unusual doesn't mean useless. Can you bake or not?" "Yes," Mira whispered. Then, stronger, "Yes, I can bake." "Then we've got a deal. Start next week. Emma can bring your first batch when they come for supplies." Mrs. Chen extended her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Mira shook it. They completed their shopping in a daze. Emma chattered excitedly about the arrangement, already planning recipes and quantities. The twins ran wild through the aisles until Colt corralled them with a look. And Mira moved through it all like she was floating, unable to quite believe what had just happened. On the way out, they passed the auction platform. It sat empty in the market square, weathered boards baking in the sun, innocent of the cruelties it had witnessed. Mira stopped, staring at it, and the others stopped with her. "That's where I stood," she said quietly, "hooded, chained, less than human." "That's where you were," Colt corrected, "not where you are now." She looked at him, this giant of a man who'd shattered her chains and carried her away from that nightmare. "Why did you really save me?" He considered the question seriously. "I told you before. I saw you. Saw a person where everyone else saw a thing. But maybe there's more to it than that." He looked out toward the mountains in the distance. "Maybe I needed saving too, and didn't know it. Maybe we saved each other. Before Mira could respond, a commotion erupted from the far end of the street. Voices raised in anger, a woman's cry, and then Marcus Thorne emerged from the crowd, Margaret right behind him, their faces twisted with rage. "There she is!" Marcus bellowed, pointing at Mira like she was an escaped criminal. "There's the ungrateful wretch, stealing from good Christian folk, corrupting children with her hideous face." The crowd parted uncertainly. Colt stepped in front of Mira immediately, the twins scrambling behind him while Emma gripped Mira's hand tight. "That's close enough, Marcus," Colt said, his voice carrying that note of absolute finality that made smart men stop in their tracks. But Marcus wasn't smart, and he was flanked by a man wearing a tarnished badge, Deputy Silas, known locally as being more interested in bribes than justice. "You got no right to keep her from us," Marcus snarled. "She's our daughter, our property by blood. We want her back." "You sold her," Colt said flatly. "Transaction was complete, witnessed by half the town." "That was a mistake. We were hasty, didn't understand what we were doing, but she belongs with family." Margaret's voice was syrupy with false concern. "Poor dear probably doesn't even know what's best for her. Mr. Maddox, surely you can understand. A girl needs her mother." "Where was her mother for 16 years?" Emma burst out, unable to contain herself. "Where were you when she was locked away and treated like an animal?" "Mind your tongue, child," Margaret snapped. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know Mira's told us everything, about the locks, about the darkness, about how you blamed her for the fire when she was just 5 years old." Marcus's face went red. "She started that fire, killed my mother with her carelessness. We had every right to—" "To what?" Mira's voice cut through the argument, surprising everyone, including herself. She stepped around Colt, shaking off Emma's restraining hand. "To lock me away? To tell me I was too hideous to be seen? To auction me off like livestock when I became inconvenient?" She walked forward, her legs trembling but her voice steady. Years of suppressed rage finally finding its outlet. The crowd pressed closer, sensing drama, but Mira only had eyes for her parents. "I was 5 years old," she said, each word deliberate as a hammer blow. 5. "I didn't start that fire. You did, Father, when you knocked over the lamp in one of your drunken rages. But it was easier to blame a child than face your own guilt. Easier to hide me away than see your shame reflected in my face every day." "You're lying," Margaret hissed. "You're delusional. The fire damaged your mind along with your face." "My mind is fine. It's my heart that was damaged. By you. By 16 years of being told I was a monster, of being locked in that room with just enough food to survive and no kindness at all." Mira's voice rose, stronger now, fueled by righteous fury. "But I'm not yours anymore. I'm not your shame. I'm not your beast. I'm just Mira, and I'm done letting you define what that means." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the deputy looked uncomfortable, his hand falling away from his gun belt. Marcus recovered first, his face contorting with rage. "You can't talk to us like that. We're your parents." "You were never my parents. Parents protect. Parents love. You just kept me alive long enough to ease your conscience." Mira turned to Colt. "Can they make me go back?" "Not while I'm breathing," Colt said simply. "The law says," the deputy began. "The law says she's an adult who was legally sold and bought. Transactions complete, papers filed. Unless you want to arrest every rancher in 3 counties who's ever bought anything at auction, you've got no case." Colt's eyes were hard as flint. "Now I suggest you escort the Thorns out of here before this gets uglier than it needs to be." Marcus lunged forward, rage overriding sense. "You can't keep her. She's ours. We have rights." Colt caught him by the shirt, stopping him cold. "You have nothing. You gave up any rights when you chained your own child on a platform and sold her for $20. Now get off my sight before I forget I'm trying to be civilized." He released Marcus with enough force to send him stumbling back into his wife. They stood there, impotent fury radiating from them, while the crowd watched with varying degrees of sympathy and disgust. Finally, Margaret grabbed her husband's arm. "Come on, this isn't worth it. Let her rot with her freak lover and his brats. See if we care." They retreated, the deputy following with obvious relief. The crowd began to disperse, some shooting Mira looks of pity, others of curiosity, a few of grudging respect. Mira stood there shaking, hardly believing what she'd just done. "You all right?" Colt asked quietly. She nodded, then shook her head, then laughed, a sound that bordered on hysterical. "I don't know. I just told off my parents in front of the whole town. I've never stood up for myself before." "You did good," Emma said fiercely, wrapping an arm around her waist. "You were amazing." "Can we go home now?" Sam asked, looking worried. "I don't like it here anymore." "Yeah," Colt agreed. "Let's go home." They loaded into the wagon and started back, but Mira couldn't stop shaking. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was draining away, leaving her hollow and terrified. She'd done it. She'd actually stood up to them. But at what cost? What if they came back? What if they brought more men, better lawyers? What if— "Stop," Colt said gently, and she realized he'd been watching her spiral. "You're safe. I meant what I said. They'll have to go through me to get to you." "But what if—" "No what ifs. We'll deal with problems as they come, not before. Right now, just breathe. You're safe. You're going home. That's all that matters." She tried to believe him, really tried. But the fear that had been her constant companion for 16 years wasn't so easily banished. It whispered to her all the way back to the ranch, painting scenarios of midnight raids and legal battles, and being dragged back to that locked room. By the time they reached home, she was nearly sick with anxiety. She helped unload the supplies with mechanical movements, her mind far away, trapped in dark possibilities. Dinner was a blur. The children's chatter barely registered, and when night fell and everyone went to bed, she found herself pacing her room, unable to settle. Around midnight, she gave up and went downstairs, intending to sit by the dying fire until exhaustion finally claimed her. But she found Colt already there, sitting in his chair with a book open, but clearly not reading it. "Can't sleep either?" he asked when she appeared in the doorway. She shook her head and moved to the hearth, staring into the embers. "They're going to come back." "Maybe. They'll bring more people. Find some way to force me back." "They can try." "You can't fight the whole town, Colt. You can't—" "Mira." He set down his book and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Listen to me. I've been on this earth 43 years. Fought in range wars, faced down rustlers and bandits and men who thought being tough made them right. And I've learned something important. Bullies back down when you refuse to. Your parents are bullies. They'll bluster and threaten, but when they realize they can't intimidate us, they'll move on to easier targets. You don't know that. I know people, and I know cowards when I see them." He stood and crossed to her, his presence solid and reassuring. "But let's say I'm wrong. Let's say they do come back with force. What then? Then you get hurt trying to protect me. The children get hurt. Everything you've built gets destroyed. Because of me. Or," he said quietly, "we stand together and show them that family isn't about blood. It's about choosing each other every single day. It's about protection and love and refusing to back down when someone threatens the people you care about." Mira looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, both the smooth side and the scarred side. "Why do you care so much? I'm nobody. I'm just a broken girl you saved on impulse." Colt reached out slowly and brushed a tear from her unmarked cheek, then, with equal gentleness, from her scarred one. "You're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference." He paused, and something shifted in his expression. "And you're not nobody. Not to us. Not to me." The way he said it made her breath catch. There was something in his eyes, a tenderness she'd glimpsed before but never let herself acknowledge, because acknowledging it meant hoping for something she'd never dared to hope for. "Colt," she whispered, "I know the timing's wrong. I know you've been through hell and you're still finding your feet. But I need you to know you matter here. You matter to Emma and the boys. And you matter to me in ways that scare me a little, if I'm being honest." "I matter," she repeated, testing the words like they were in a foreign language. "Yes. So stop thinking about running. Stop thinking about what you'll cost us. You're worth fighting for, Mira. You're worth protecting, and if it takes the rest of my life to make you believe that, then I've got time." She couldn't speak, could only stand there while something fundamental shifted inside her, while hope, real, terrifying hope, bloomed in places she'd thought were too damaged to grow anything. Then the moment shattered. Thunder cracked overhead, so loud and sudden it felt like the sky was splitting open. The windows rattled and rain began to hammer against the roof with a violence that spoke of storms born in hell. "Damn," Colt muttered, moving to the window. Outside, the world had disappeared behind sheets of rain. Lightning flashed, illuminating the yard in stark white snapshots. This is bad. This is really bad. Another crack of thunder, and then a scream from upstairs. The children. Colt was moving before Mira could react, taking the stairs 3 at a time. She followed, her heart pounding. In the twins' room, Sam and Ben were huddled together in one bed, eyes wide with terror as wind howled through a window that had blown open, rain soaking the floor. "I've got them," Colt said, scooping both boys into his arms. "Get Emma." Mira ran to Emma's room and found the girl already awake, clutching her pillow as another flash of lightning turned the world white. "Come on," Mira urged, reaching for her hand. "Downstairs, away from the windows." They'd barely made it to the hallway when the sound of breaking glass exploded from downstairs. Then a terrible groaning, the sound of wood under stress, and a crash that shook the entire house. "The porch!" Colt yelled over the storm. "The porch is coming down! Everyone to the back hallway, now!" They scrambled through the dark house, lightning providing irregular bursts of illumination. The front windows were shattering one by one, wind screaming through the openings like a living thing. Furniture scraped across floors. Pictures fell from walls. The house itself seemed to be crying out in pain. In the narrow back hallway, the most sheltered part of the house, they huddled together. Colt set the twins down but kept his arms around them. Emma pressed against Mira, who wrapped the girl tight, her own fear forgotten in the need to protect these children who'd given her everything. "Is the house going to fall down?" Ben asked, his voice small. "No," Colt said firmly. "This house has weathered worse. We just need to wait it out." But the storm had other ideas. A sound like a freight train filled the air, and then the wall beside them bulged inward. Colt reacted instantly, shoving the twins and Emma toward the opposite corner. Mira moved with them, her body instinctively curving over the children, making herself a shield. The wall exploded inward in a shower of splinters and rain. Wind whipped through the gap, bringing with it debris and cold and chaos. Mira felt something slash across her back, but didn't let go of the children. Just held tighter, curled smaller, made herself armor between them and destruction. Then Colt was there, his huge body covering all of them, his arms creating a cage of safety in the midst of madness. Through the roar of wind and rain, Mira could hear his voice, steady and calm, talking them through it. "I've got you. You're all safe. I've got you. Just breathe. Just hold on. I've got you." Time became meaningless. Seconds stretched into hours, hours compressed into heartbeats. There was only the storm and the warmth of bodies pressed together, and Colt's voice anchoring them to safety. And then, slowly, the wind began to ease. The rain softened from a pounding assault to a steady drumming. The thunder rolled away toward the mountains, taking its fury with it. In the sudden quiet, they stayed huddled together, none of them quite ready to believe it was over. Finally, Colt stirred, checking each of them in turn. "Everyone all right? Anyone hurt?" "I'm okay," Emma whispered. "We're fine," Sam said, Ben nodding agreement. Then Colt's eyes found Mira, and his expression shifted. "You're bleeding." She touched her back and her hand came away red. "It's nothing, just a scratch." "Let me see." "The children first. Make sure they're really okay." But the children were already checking themselves over, finding only bruises and fear. Colt gently turned Mira around and swore softly. A long gash ran across her shoulder blade where flying wood had caught her. "This needs cleaning and bandaging. Come on." He led her to the kitchen, which had somehow survived mostly intact, and lit a lamp with shaking hands. In the flickering light, the damage to her back looked worse. But he worked with steady efficiency, cleaning and binding the wound while she gritted her teeth against the pain. "You shielded them," he said quietly as he worked. "When the wall came down, you put yourself between the debris and my children." "Of course I did." "Not of course. Not everyone would have. Not everyone would risk themselves for kids that aren't theirs." Mira turned to look at him over her shoulder. "They are mine. Maybe not by blood, but they're mine. You all are." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding deeper than words. Colt's hand stilled on her shoulder, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I thought I'd lost you. When that wall came down, I thought... He couldn't finish. But you didn't. We're all safe, because you protected us. We protected each other. He tied off the bandage and helped her back into her dress. That's what family does. They found the children in the living room, huddled together under blankets. The front of the house was a disaster. Windows shattered, furniture overturned, half the porch torn away and scattered across the yard. But the back rooms were largely intact, and that was enough. They spent the rest of the night together, no one wanting to be alone. As dawn broke, gray and exhausted, they ventured outside to survey the damage. It was extensive but not catastrophic. The porch could be rebuilt. The windows could be replaced. The walls could be patched. They'd survived. Battered, shaken, but together and whole. Standing in the wreckage of his front yard, Colt felt Mira slip her hand into his. He looked down at her, this girl who'd been called a beast, who'd been sold like property, who'd just spent a night protecting his children with her own body, and something in him finally, completely, surrendered. Mira, he said softly, I think I need to tell you something. She looked up at him, her scarred face beautiful in the morning light, and waited. But before he could speak, the sound of approaching horses made them both turn. A group of riders was coming up the road, a dozen or more, and at their head rode Marcus and Margaret Thorne. They'd come back after all, and they'd brought force with them. Colt's hand tightened around Mira's, his body going tense as a drawn bowstring. Behind them, the children emerged onto what remained of the porch, and Emma immediately herded the twins back inside despite their protests. The riders came to a halt at the edge of the yard, their horses stamping and snorting in the muddy aftermath of the storm. Marcus sat tall in his saddle, triumph written across his weasel features. Margaret beside him wore that same cold smile Mira remembered from childhood, the smile that preceded locked doors and missed meals. But it was the man in the center who made Mira's blood run cold. Judge Whitmore, fat and prosperous in his fine coat, his jowls quivering as he surveyed the storm damage with barely concealed satisfaction. Behind them, rough-looking men sat astride their horses, hired muscle, with dead eyes and loose morals. Mr. Maddock, Judge Whitmore called out in his pompous courtroom voice, I'm afraid we have legal business to conduct. The Thornes have filed a petition for the return of their daughter, citing coercion and mental incompetence at the time of sale. That's horseshit, and you know it, Colt said flatly. The sale was legal and public. Half the town witnessed it. Nevertheless, questions have been raised about the girl's capacity to consent to her own sale. Furthermore, Mr. Thorne has produced evidence that you failed to register the proper ownership papers with the county clerk. The judge's smile was oily, which means, technically, the sale was never completed. Miss Thorne remains the legal property of her parents. I'm not property, Mira said, her voice shaking but audible. I'm a person. A person who is mentally deficient, according to medical testimony, Margaret called out. Damaged by the fire that scarred you, dear. You don't know what's best for yourself. You need your family. I have a family. Mira stepped forward despite Colt's restraining hand. And it's not you. Well, Marcus's face darkened. You ungrateful little monster. After everything we did for you, fed you, housed you, kept you from frightening decent folk, and this is how you repay us? By spreading lies and living in sin with some rancher? Living in sin? Colt's voice dropped to a dangerous register. That's a serious accusation, Judge. I hope you've got proof before you let slander like that stand. The girl lives under your roof, unchaperoned, unmarried, Whitmore said with false regret. It raises questions about your intentions and her virtue. Of course, if you were to marry her, that would settle the matter of guardianship. But I suspect that's not in your plans, is it, Mr. Maddox? It was a trap, beautifully laid. Either admit he had no intention of marrying Mira, which would make her seem like a kept woman and strengthen the Thornes' case, or propose on the spot under duress, which no man of pride would do. Either way, they won. But Colt had never been good at playing by other people's rules. My intentions toward Mira are honorable and none of your damn business, he said. But since you're asking in front of witnesses, I'll make it plain. He turned to Mira, his gray eyes steady on hers. I was planning to wait. Do this proper, with flowers and a ring that didn't come from necessity. But I've never been good at waiting, and I'm too old to start now. He took both her hands in his, and the world seemed to shrink down to just the two of them despite the audience of hostile faces. Mira Thorne, you are the bravest, kindest, strongest person I've ever met. You've brought light back into this house, taught my children to see past surfaces to what matters underneath, and shown me that maybe I'm not as dead inside as I thought. His voice was rough with emotion. I don't have pretty words or promises I can't keep, but I can promise you safety. I can promise you family. And I can promise that if you'll have me, I'll spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you know you're valued. Mira stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Colt, you don't have to do this. Not like this. Not because they're forcing you. They're not forcing anything. I'm asking because I want to, because somewhere between that auction platform and last night when I thought I'd lost you, I fell in love with you, and I'm done pretending I haven't. The words hung in the storm-scrubbed air between them, impossible and perfect and terrifying. Mira's hands trembled in his, her scarred face vulnerable and open and so full of hope it hurt to look at. You love me? She whispered. I love you. Even though especially because you're you. Every part of you, the scared parts and the brave parts, the scarred parts and the whole parts. All of it. All of you. Behind them, Emma had crept back onto the porch with the twins, drawn by the sound of their father's voice. She was crying openly, hands clasped under her chin like she was watching a miracle unfold. Mira looked at Colt, this giant of a man who'd saved her, protected her, given her a home and a family, and now was offering her his name, his life, his heart. And she thought about the girl she'd been on that platform, hooded and broken, convinced she was a monster. Thought about the woman she was becoming, learning day by day that maybe she deserved softness after all. I love you too, she said, the words breaking free like birds from a cage. I think I have since the moment you lifted me off that platform. I just never believed I was allowed to. You're allowed. You're so damn allowed. He pulled her close, wrapping her in arms that felt like safety incarnate. So is that a yes? She laughed through her tears. Yes. Yes, it's a yes. He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, like she was something precious that might break. And around them, the world exploded into motion. Emma and the twins erupted in cheers, jumping and hollering with unrestrained joy. The hired men shifted uncomfortably in their saddles, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. And Marcus Thorne's face went purple with rage. This doesn't change anything, he roared. That engagement isn't legal. There's no license, no waiting period, no... Actually, came a new voice from the road. I believe congratulations are in order. Everyone turned to see Mrs. Chen riding up on a small gray mare, and behind her a procession of townsfolk, shopkeepers and ranchers, families and widows, easily 30 people on horseback and in wagons. At their head rode Reverend Mills, the elderly minister who'd buried Colt's wife 3 years prior. Mrs. Chen, Judge Whitmore sputtered. What is the meaning of this? The meaning, Your Honor, is that some of us heard about your little visit to the Thorns last night, about how you were planning to come out here and intimidate Mr. Maddox into giving up a woman who clearly doesn't want to return to her abusers. Mrs. Chen's voice was crisp as winter air. And we decided that wasn't going to stand. This is legal business, Whitmore blustered. You have no right to interfere. We have every right. Reverend Mills urged his horse forward, his white beard bristling with righteous indignation. I've known Colt Maddox for 20 years. He's a good man, a godly man, and if he says that girl has been mistreated, I believe him. Furthermore, if he wants to marry her, I'll perform the ceremony right here and now, and you can take your objections to the Almighty. You can't just... There are laws. Marcus was nearly apoplectic now. Papers to file, witnesses required, a waiting period of... No waiting period required in cases of emergency, Mrs. Chen interrupted. And I'd say a judge and a lynch mob showing up at dawn constitutes an emergency. As for witnesses, we've got 30 right here. She looked at Colt. That is, if you're serious about this proposal. Colt never took his eyes off Mira. Dead serious. Then let's make it official. Reverend Reverend Mills dismounted with the stiffness of age and made his way to where Colt and Mira stood. The townsfolk formed a rough semicircle around them, creating a barrier between the couple and the Thorns group. Judge Whitmore looked apoplectic, but even he wasn't stupid enough to challenge 30 armed citizens on their home ground. "Now then," the Reverend said, pulling a worn Bible from his coat. "This is a bit irregular, but the Lord works in mysterious ways. Do you, Colt Maddox, take this woman as your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, in sickness and health, till death do you part?" "I do," Colt said without hesitation. "And do you, Mira Thorne, take this man as your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, in sickness and health, till death do you part?" Mira looked at Colt, at his children watching from the porch with shining eyes, at the circle of townsfolk who'd ridden out at dawn to defend her right to choose her own life. Then she looked at her parents, at their faces twisted with impotent fury, and she smiled. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by God in the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The Reverend beamed at them. "You may kiss your bride, son." Colt cupped Mira's face in his huge hands, his thumbs gentle on both her smooth cheek and her scarred one, and kissed her like she was air and he'd been drowning. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, hats thrown in the air, whooping that echoed across the hills. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Mira was laughing and crying at once. "We're married! We're actually married!" "You're stuck with me now," Colt said, grinning wider than she'd ever seen him smile. "I can live with that." Marcus's voice cut through the celebration like a knife. "This is a farce, a mockery. That marriage isn't legal and we'll have it annulled before—" "Judge Whitmore," Mrs. Chen said sweetly, pulling a folded paper from her saddlebag. "Would you care to explain this document I found in the county clerk's office? The one showing that Colt Maddox did file the proper ownership papers for his auction purchase 3 days after the transaction, dated, stamped, and signed by the clerk himself?" The color drained from Whitmore's face. "That's impossible. I checked the records myself, and you missed it because you were looking under livestock instead of personal contracts. Easy mistake to make. Unless, of course, you weren't really looking at all and just took Marcus's word for it." She smiled, showing teeth, which would suggest collusion between a judge and a plaintiff. "Grounds for disbarment, I believe." Whitmore opened and closed his mouth like a landed fish. Marcus looked between the judge and the crowd, finally understanding that the trap he'd laid had snapped shut on his own leg. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You can't keep her. She's ours by blood." "She's mine by law," Colt said quietly, "and by choice. Her choice, which is the only one that matters. We could contest the marriage. Mental incompetence, coercion, fraud. You could try," Mrs. Chen agreed. "Of course, then we'd have to bring up the real story of how Mira got those scars. Funny thing, I've been doing some asking around. Turns out there were witnesses to that fire 16 years ago. People who remember seeing Marcus Thorne stumbling drunk from the house before it went up. People who remember how convenient it was that his mother died and his 5-year-old daughter got blamed." The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus went white, then red, his hands clenching into fists. "You can't prove anything." "Maybe not. But I can talk. And in a small town, talk is currency." Mrs. Chen's eyes were hard as agates. "You've got 2 choices, Marcus. You can ride away now, accept that your daughter is married and beyond your reach, and maybe people will forget about certain questions regarding that fire. Or you can push this, and I'll make it my personal mission to dig up every piece of dirt on you until the whole territory knows exactly what kind of man you are." Margaret grabbed her husband's arm, her face pinched with fear. "Marcus, let's go. It's not worth it." "But she's gone. She's gone. We lost." Margaret's voice was bitter as wormwood. "Let's go home before we lose more than just her." For a moment it looked like Marcus might charge forward anyway, pride and rage warring with self-preservation. But the circle of armed townsfolk, the storm-damaged ranch behind them, and the calm certainty in Colt's eyes finally broke through his fury. "Fine," he spat. Keep the freak. She was always more trouble than she was worth anyway. But don't come crying to us when you realize what a mistake you've made, Maddox. That face might be just skin, but the rot goes deeper. Get off my land, Colt said, his voice deadly quiet. And if you ever come back, if you ever so much as speak my wife's name, I'll make you regret the day you were born. That's not a threat. It's a promise. Marcus jerked his reins, wheeling his horse around. Margaret followed, and the judge and their hired men fell in behind them like a funeral procession. The entire group rode away in sullen silence, heading back toward Dry Creek and whatever remained of their reputation. The moment they were out of sight, the tension broke. Townsfolk surged forward with congratulations and backslapping, Mrs. Chen pressing a hastily wrapped package into Mira's hands. "Wedding present," she said with a wink. "Best linen in my shop. You're going to need it." Emma launched herself off the porch and into Mira's arms, sobbing happily. "You're really my mother now, really and truly." "If you'll have me," Mira said, holding the girl tight. "Of course I'll have you. I picked you first, remember?" The twins piled on, creating a knot of arms and tears and laughter. Colt stood back and watched his family, his complete family now, legal and whole, and felt something in his chest that had been locked tight since Sarah's death finally ease open. Reverend Mills clapped him on the shoulder. "You did good, son. Real good. Sarah would be proud." "You think so?" "I know so. She always said you needed someone to shake you out of your grief and remind you how to live. Looks like you found her." The celebration continued for hours. Someone produced a fiddle and someone else a jug, and soon there was music and dancing in the muddy yard. Neighbors pitched in to help clear the worst of the storm debris, and by midday the porch had been stabilized and the broken windows boarded up. Through it all, Mira moved in a daze, her hand never far from Colt's. She was married. Actually married. To this man who'd saved her, this man who loved her scars and all, this man whose children had become her children in the space of weeks. As the sun began its descent and the neighbors finally took their leave, the family gathered on what remained of the porch. Emma sat between Mira and Colt. The twins sprawled at their feet, and for a moment they just breathed, letting the magnitude of the day settle over them. "Pa?" Sam said finally. "Does this mean Mira's really staying forever?" "Forever and a day," Colt confirmed. "Good." Ben yawned enormously. "'Cause I like her biscuits better than yours." Despite the exhaustion, they all laughed. Emma leaned her head on Mira's shoulder, and Mira wrapped an arm around her, marveling at how natural it felt. This girl, this brave, fierce, beautiful girl, was her daughter now. These boys were her sons. This man was her husband. She had a family, a real family, not because of blood or obligation, but because of choice. "Thank you," she whispered to Colt as the children began to drift inside, worn out from the excitement. "For what?" "For seeing me. For saving me. For loving me." He pulled her close, tucking her under his arm where she fit like she'd been designed for that exact space. "Thank you for letting me. For trusting me. For giving me a reason to believe in second chances." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had witnessed her auction, her rescue, her transformation from beast to woman to wife, the same stars that would witness whatever came next. "What do we do now?" Mira asked softly. "Now?" Colt considered. "Now we rebuild the porch, fix the windows, plant a garden come spring, raise these kids to be good people, grow old together." He looked down at her, his eyes soft in the starlight. "Now we live, Mira. We just live." She thought about the girl in the burlap sack, the beast on the platform, the monster locked away for 16 years. Thought about how that girl would never have believed this moment was possible, would never have dared to hope for love or family or simple, ordinary happiness. And she thought about how wrong that girl had been, how much strength she'd had all along, buried under the weight of other people's cruelty. How much capacity for love and joy and fierce protective courage. "I'd like that," she said, leaning into her husband's warmth as the night settled around them like a blessing. "I'd like that very much." Inside the house, Emma was getting the twins ready for bed, her voice carrying through the broken windows as she narrated some elaborate bedtime story involving dragons and knights and a princess who saved herself. The sounds of home, of family, of belonging. Mira closed her eyes and let herself feel it, all of it, the fear and the joy, the pain and the healing, the ending and the beginning. Let herself believe finally, completely, that she deserved this, that she was worth saving, that she was, and always had been, human. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Colt found Mira in the kitchen. She was washing dishes by lamplight, and something about the domestic simplicity of it, his wife in his kitchen, in their home, made his throat tight. "Leave those," he said softly. "Come with me." He led her outside to where the old burlap sack hung on the line, exactly where he'd left it weeks ago. It swayed gently in the night breeze, a ghost of who she used to be. "I kept meaning to throw this away," he said, "but I couldn't. Didn't feel right." Mira reached out and touched the rough fabric, remembering the suffocating darkness, the shame, the belief that she deserved to be hidden away. Then she let her hand fall. "I don't need it anymore," she said. "I'm not afraid to be seen." "Then let's put it away properly, not destroyed. That'd be pretending it never happened, but folded up and stored, acknowledged but not defining." Together they took down the sack. Mira folded it carefully, her movements deliberate and calm, and when it was a small square of rough cloth, she held it for a moment against her chest. "Thank you for protecting me when I needed protecting," she whispered to it. "But I don't need you anymore." Colt took it from her and placed it in a trunk in the barn, closing the lid gently. When he returned, Mira was standing in the moonlight, her face upturned to the stars, her scars silver in the pale light. "You're beautiful," he said, not for the first time and not for the last. She looked at him and smiled, that lopsided, imperfect smile that lit up her whole face. "I'm starting to believe you." He crossed to her and took her hands, and they stood there under the vast Montana sky. Two broken people who'd found each other in the wreckage and decided to build something whole. "I love you," she said, the words coming easier now. "I love you so much." "I love you too, and I'm going to spend every day making sure you never doubt it." He kissed her then, gentle and deep, a promise and a beginning. And when they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Mira laughed, a sound of pure, unguarded joy. "What?" Colt asked, smiling at her happiness. "I was just thinking about what they used to call me, the beast in the sack." She shook her head, marveling. "But you looked inside and found something worth loving." "I found you," he corrected, "and you were always worth loving. You just needed someone to show you." They walked back to the house hand in hand, their shadows long in the moonlight, their future uncertain but full of possibility. Behind them, the barn door swung gently in the breeze, and inside the trunk, the burlap sack lay folded and still. A relic of a past that no longer had power, a reminder of how far one girl had traveled from monster to woman to wife to mother. A symbol of survival, yes, but also of transformation, because the beast in the sack had never existed. There had only ever been Mira, waiting to be seen, waiting to be saved, waiting to become who she was always meant to be. And now, finally, she was free. The first month of marriage passed in a blur of reconstruction and revelation. The damaged porch became a family project, with even the twins hammering nails under Colt's patient supervision, while Mira and Emma replaced the shattered windows with new glass ordered from town. Each board laid, each pane fitted, felt like building something more than just a house. They were constructing a future, piece by deliberate piece. But it was the small moments that Mira treasured most. The way Colt's hand would find hers under the dinner table. The way Emma started calling her Ma, without fanfare or announcement, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The way the twins would race to show her their latest drawings or discoveries, competing for her attention with the fierce devotion of children who'd decided she was theirs to love. She'd started supplying Mrs. Chen's store with bread and pastries, her baking becoming locally famous within weeks. People came from neighboring ranches just to buy her cinnamon rolls, and the income, her own income, earned by her own hands, felt like freedom in tangible form. She kept the money in a tin on the kitchen shelf, and sometimes she'd just look at it, marveling that she could own something, build something, be something beyond what others had told her she was. But freedom, she was learning, wasn't just the absence of chains. It was the courage to exist fully in a world that had tried to erase you. 6 weeks after the wedding, as autumn began painting the mountains in shades of amber and rust, Mira stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, their bedroom, hers and Colt's, and really looked at herself. Not quick glances or averted eyes, but a long, honest assessment of the woman staring back. Half her face was conventionally beautiful, the kind of features that might have made her sought after in another life. The other half bore the marks of fire and time, the scarring that had defined her existence for 16 years. But looking now, she didn't see a monster. She saw survival. She saw strength. She saw a woman who'd walked through hell and emerged still capable of love. "You're doing it again," Colt said from the doorway, his voice warm with affection. She smiled at his reflection. "Doing what?" "Looking at yourself like you're trying to solve a puzzle." "Maybe I am. I spent so long not looking that I'm still not sure what I'm seeing." He crossed the room and stood behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders, both of them reflected in the mirror. "You want to know what I see? Tell me." "I see the woman who taught my daughter that strength comes in quiet forms. I see the mother who checks on the boys 3 times a night to make sure they're breathing. I see the wife who laughs at my terrible jokes and doesn't complain when I track mud through her clean kitchen." His eyes met hers in the glass. "I see the bravest person I've ever known." She leaned back against his chest, letting his solidity anchor her. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that I'm here, that I'm yours, that I'm allowed to be happy." "You're allowed everything, Mira. Joy, peace, love, all of it. And you're going to keep being allowed it for the next 50 years, God willing." She turned in his arms and kissed him, soft and grateful, then pulled back with a small smile. "Emma wants to go into town today. Something about fabric for new dresses. Says I need more than 3 outfits if I'm going to be a proper ranch wife." Emma's probably right. That girl inherited her mother's sense of these things. He paused. "You comfortable going into town now, after last time?" The last time had been 2 weeks ago, when Mira had accompanied Emma to the general store and been met with a mixture of reactions. Some people had stared, others had whispered, but Mrs. Chen had greeted her warmly, and several women had complimented her baking, and slowly, so slowly, Mira had begun to understand that not everyone saw her as a monster. "I think so," she said now. "I can't hide here forever, as much as I might want to sometimes." "You're not hiding, you're living. There's a difference." He kissed her forehead. "But I'll come with you today. Safety and numbers and all that." They set out mid-morning, the whole family packed into the wagon. The boys were excited about candy from the general store. Emma had her fabric list, and Mira clutched Colt's hand tighter than strictly necessary as Dry Creek came into view. The town looked different in the bright autumn sunlight. Less menacing, more ordinary. Just a collection of buildings where people lived and worked and went about their daily business. Still, Mira's heart hammered as they rolled down the main street. But something was different this time. As they passed, people nodded. A few even waved. Old Mr. Peterson, who owned the livery, called out a greeting to Colt and tipped his hat to Mira. The change was subtle but unmistakable. "Word spreads fast in small towns," Colt murmured as he helped her down from the wagon. "People know you stood up to your parents, know you're making good at the ranch, know you're not the broken thing they thought you were." "Or they're just scared of you," Mira whispered back. "That too. But mostly the first thing." Inside Mrs. Chen's store, they were greeted like old friends. The shopkeeper immediately pulled Emma toward the fabric section, chattering about new patterns that had just arrived. The twins made a beeline for the candy jars, and Mira found herself face to face with 3 women she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Maddox," the eldest said, extending her hand. "I'm Dorothy Hartford. This is my daughter Anne and my niece Sarah. We wanted to thank you." Mira shook her hand cautiously. "Thank me? For what?" "For your bread. My husband hasn't stopped talking about those dinner rolls since I brought some home last week. Says they're the best he's had since his mother passed 20 years ago." Dorothy smiled warmly. "But also for being brave enough to show your face. My Sarah here has a birthmark across half her neck, and she's been hiding it under high collars her whole life. Since you started coming to town, she's been wearing it visible. Says if Mrs. Maddox can be brave, so can she. The young woman, Sarah, blushed but nodded, pulling down her collar to reveal a port wine stain that spread across her throat like spilled wine. It's not the same as what you survived, she said quietly. But people have always stared, always made me feel like I should hide. Seeing you walk around with your head high, it helped. Mira felt tears prick her eyes. I don't feel brave most days. That's what makes it brave, Dorothy said gently. Doing it scared. That's real courage. They talked for a few more minutes before the women made their purchases and left. Mira stood there, stunned, until Colt appeared at her elbow with an armload of supplies. You all right? I think I helped someone, just by existing, by not hiding. You've helped a lot of people, darling. You just don't see it yet. The rest of the visit passed without incident. They loaded their supplies, collected the children, and were preparing to leave when a commotion at the far end of the street caught their attention. A young girl, no more than 7 or 8, was crying on the church steps while her mother tried frantically to comfort her. As they drew closer, Mira could see why. The child's dress had caught on something and torn badly, revealing bandages on her arm. I'm sorry, Mama, the girl sobbed. I'm sorry I'm so clumsy. I ruin everything. The mother looked exhausted and worried. It's all right, sweetheart. We'll fix it. We always do. Mira found herself moving toward them before she'd consciously decided to. Colt followed, always her shadow, always her support. Excuse me, Mira said softly. I couldn't help but overhear. I'm pretty good with a needle. Maybe I could help. The mother looked up and recognition flickered across her face. She'd clearly heard about Mira. Everyone in town had by now, but whatever she'd heard didn't translate to hostility, just relief. Oh, would you? I'm terrible at mending, and this is her only good dress. We were supposed to meet her father at the hotel, but now... She trailed off helplessly. May I? Mira asked the little girl, who was staring at her with wide eyes. The child nodded, and Mira knelt on the steps, examining the tear. This isn't so bad. I can fix it right here if you have thread. The mother produced a small sewing kit from her bag, and Mira set to work. Her stitches were small and precise, nearly invisible. As she worked, she noticed the little girl staring at her scarred side. Does it hurt? The child asked with the blunt curiosity of youth. Not anymore. It did once, a long time ago. What happened? There was a fire when I was about your age. I got burned. Were you scared? Mira paused, considering the question seriously. Yes, very scared, and I stayed scared for a long time after, but I'm not scared anymore. Because you're brave now? Because I found people who love me no matter what I look like, and that made it easier to be brave. The little girl thought about this, then pointed to her own bandaged arm. I fell. Mama says I might have a scar. Scars aren't so bad, Mira said gently, finishing the last stitch and biting off the thread. They're just proof you survived something hard. They're like medals, really. Medals you wear on your skin instead of your shirt. The child's face brightened. Medals. I like that. Mira handed the repaired dress back to the mother, who looked close to tears. Thank you so much. How can I repay you? No payment needed. Just pass the kindness forward when you get the chance. As they walked back to the wagon, Emma appeared at Mira's side, pride shining in her eyes. That was really nice what you did. It was just mending a dress. It was more than that. You gave that little girl a different way to think about her scar. That's bigger than sewing. Later, as they drove home through the golden afternoon, Mira leaned against Colt's shoulder and watched the landscape roll by. The mountains stood eternal against the sky, the grass rippled like water in the breeze, and somewhere a hawk circled on thermal currents, hunting with patient grace. I think I'm starting to understand something, she said quietly. What's that? Why you saved me. I used to think it was impulse or charity, but it's bigger than that. You saved me because that's what people are supposed to do for each other. See each other, help each other, refuse to look away when someone's suffering. Colt's arm tightened around her. Took you long enough to figure that out. I'm a slow learner sometimes. You're exactly the learner you need to be. The weeks continued to unspool, each one bringing small triumphs and minor setbacks, all of them navigated together. Mira's baking business grew until she was supplying 3 stores in neighboring towns. Emma bloomed under having a mother again, her grief over Sarah's death finally easing as she learned that love doesn't replace love. It expands to include it. The twins grew like weeds, their drawings now covering most of the barn's exterior, a riot of color and imagination that made visitors smile. And Colt watched his wife become more herself every day, watched her confidence grow, watched her laugh more, and flinch less. Watched her become the woman she'd always been underneath the fear. 3 months after the wedding, on a crisp December morning with snow threatening in the gray-bellied clouds, Colt found Mira in the barn. She was standing in front of the trunk where they'd stored the burlap sack, her hand resting on the lid. "You thinking about it?" he asked. "Thinking about burning it." "Why?" "Because it still has power. Even locked away, even folded up, I know it's here. And sometimes I wonder if I should destroy it completely, erase that part of my life." Colt came to stand beside her. "Or you could leave it. Proof of where you came from, reminder of how far you've traveled." "It hurts to remember." "Healing usually does." He paused. "But it's your choice. It always has been. If you need to burn it to move forward, then we'll burn it together." Mira stood there for a long moment, her hand on the trunk, feeling the weight of the decision. Then slowly, she lifted her hand and stepped back. "No," she said finally. "I think I'll leave it. Not because I need it or want to remember the bad parts, but because someday, maybe, I'll want to show my children or grandchildren what their mother survived, what she overcame, and maybe it'll help them be brave when they're scared. That's the spirit." Colt pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Now come on. Emma's been baking all morning, and the boys are dying to show you their Christmas surprise." Christmas at the ranch was a revelation. Emma had decorated every surface with pine boughs and holly. The twins had made ornaments from pine cones and string, and on Christmas morning, when they gathered around the small tree Colt had cut from the North Ridge, Mira felt something she'd never experienced before. She felt like she belonged to something larger than herself, something good and warm and permanent. The children gave her gifts they'd made: drawings, a carved horse from Ben, a pressed flower collection from Sam, a scarf Emma had knitted in secret, and when Colt handed her a small box wrapped in brown paper, she opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a ring, simple silver etched with a running horse, the same one he'd promised her that day on the porch, but also a pair of matching earrings, delicate and beautiful. "I know I gave you a ring already," he said, "but that one was practical, done in haste. This one's because I want to, because you deserve beautiful things, because I love you." She threw her arms around his neck, crying happy tears while the children whooped and hollered. And later, when the excitement had died down and the children were playing with their new toys, she stood at the window wearing her new jewelry and watched snow begin to fall. Behind her, Colt wrapped his arms around her waist and rested his chin on her head. "Happy? Happier than I ever thought possible. Happier than I deserve." "You deserve everything, Mira Maddox. When are you going to believe that?" She turned in his arms and looked up at him, this man who'd given her everything: safety, family, love, and most importantly, the courage to believe she was worth all of it. "I'm starting to," she said. "Slowly, but I'm starting to." Winter deepened, spring returned, and life continued its steady rhythm. Mira's confidence grew with each passing season. She started teaching a baking class at the church hall, showing other women her techniques. She hired a young girl from town to help with deliveries, giving employment to someone who needed it the same way she once had. She became known not as the Beast or the Thorn Girl or even Colt's wife, but simply as Mira, baker, mother, friend. The scars that had once defined her became just another part of her appearance, no more remarkable than her brown hair or her slight build. And one summer evening, almost a year after their marriage, Mira stood on the newly rebuilt porch in a white cotton dress, her face uncovered, her hair braided and adorned with wildflowers Emma had picked that morning. She looked out over the ranch that had become her home, at the children playing in the yard, at Colt walking up from the barn with that steady, ground-eating stride. He climbed the steps and stopped in front of her, taking in the sight of her, his wife, backlit by the setting sun, looking like every dream he'd never dared to have. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how far I've come, about that platform in Dry Creek, how I stood there convinced I was a monster, convinced I deserved everything bad that had ever happened to me." She smiled, that lopsided smile he loved. "And then this giant cowboy rode in and changed everything." "I didn't change anything, just saw what was already there." "You saved me, Colt, saved my life, yes, but more than that. You saved my heart. You looked inside the sack and found something worth fighting for." He pulled her close, and they stood there in the golden light while their children played and the mountains stood eternal and the future stretched before them, uncertain but full of promise. "They called you a beast," he murmured against her hair. "But I found a woman. I found my wife. I found my heart." She pulled back just enough to look at him, her scarred face and smooth face equally beautiful in that moment, equally beloved. "And I found mine. I thought it was dead, locked away in that room all those years, but it was just waiting for someone to show me it was safe to live again." Behind them, Emma called out that dinner was ready. The twins came running, covered in dirt and joy. The evening insects began their chorus. Life, in all its ordinary glory, continued. That night, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into peaceful quiet, Mira and Colt walked out to the eastern pasture where the first stars were emerging. They lay in the grass the way young lovers do, staring up at the infinite sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Mira asked. "Taking a chance on me?" "Never, not once. Not even for a second." "Even when I burned the biscuits last Tuesday?" He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Even then. Though I won't lie, those biscuits were pretty bad." She swatted his arm, and they lay there laughing like children, like people who'd earned their joy through surviving sorrow. "I love you," she said when the laughter faded. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." That's how you know it's real. Real love is terrifying because it matters so damn much. He turned his head to look at her. But it's also the only thing that makes this short, hard life worth living. She thought about the girl in the burlap sack, the one who'd been so certain she was unlovable. Thought about how wrong she'd been, how much strength she'd had all along, buried under years of cruelty and lies. And she thought about the woman she was now, baker, mother, wife, friend. A woman with scars and stories and courage earned through survival. A woman who'd learned that beauty wasn't about symmetry or perfection, but about the capacity to love and be loved in return. "Maybe from today on," she whispered, echoing the words Colt had said to her months ago, "we live with nothing left to hide." "We already do, darling. We already do." They lay there until the stars crowded the sky from horizon to horizon, until the night air grew cool and drove them back inside. And as they walked hand in hand toward the house, toward their home, their family, their life, Mira looked back once at the barn where the burlap sack lay folded in its trunk. They had called her the beast in the sack, had tried to make her believe she was something to be hidden and ashamed of. But Colt had looked past the surface to the truth underneath. He'd found a woman worth fighting for, a heart worth saving, a love worth building a life around. And she had found the same in him, not a savior, but a partner. Someone who saw her completely and loved her anyway. Someone who'd helped her understand that she'd never been a monster at all. Just a girl who'd been taught to fear her own reflection. A girl who'd needed someone to show her that scars were just proof of survival, that being different wasn't the same as being wrong, that love could heal wounds thought to be permanent. Inside the house, Emma had left a lamp burning in the window, a beacon, a welcome, a promise that this was home. Mira squeezed Colt's hand and he squeezed back, and together they crossed the threshold into the life they'd built. A life without hiding, without shame, without fear. A life where a girl once called a beast had learned to be beautifully, perfectly human. And that, Mira thought, as Colt closed the door behind them and pulled her into his arms, was the greatest miracle of all. Not that she'd been saved from the platform, not that she'd married well, or found safety, or even learned to live without the hood. The miracle was simpler and more profound than all of that. The miracle was that she'd learned to believe she deserved saving, that her scars didn't define her worth, that she was, and always had been, enough. The beast in the sack was gone, laid to rest in a trunk in a barn, a relic of a past that held no more power. In its place stood Mira Maddox, scarred and strong, broken and healed, lost and found, and finally, impossibly, free.